Chapter 1. The ancient cold of the Carpathian Manor was a living thing, a perpetual, aching stillness that clung to the velvet drapery and the skeletal branches visible through the leaded panes. It was a cold that tasted of dust and forgotten centuries, a precise counterpoint to the controlled furnace of Lord Valerius de Caelen's eternal body. Valerius, the self-appointed anchor of the Covenant, stood before the immense hearth in the grand scriptorium, the flames doing nothing to warm the chill that had settled in the deepest chambers of his conscience. Tonight, the silence of the ancestral hall, usually a solace, felt instead like a vast, lonely tomb he had constructed for himself. His guilt was a familiar, exquisite agony, the burden of 1,000 years of choices, each one a stone in the cairn of his self-hatred. He was the most powerful of his kind, yet his greatest power was a fiercely guarded capacity for mercy, a terrifying liability in a political landscape governed by fang and ancient oath. He ran a scarred thumb over the seal of the Lex Caelin, an oppressive manuscript detailing the punitive laws he himself had authored to preserve his line. The paper was cold and brittle beneath the touch of his unnaturally warm skin. His eyes, the color of storm-swept amethyst, were locked on the flames, but saw only the ash of the life he had extinguished, his own, and that of countless others sacrificed for the greater good of the nocturnal empire. The manor was a fortress, a shield he held against a world that perpetually sought his bloodline's secrets, yet within its walls he was merely a solitary sentinel. Loneliness was his birthright, sealed by the first covenant, and he had embraced it with the icy conviction of a true fanatic. His guard, the elite ash-eaters, patrolled the perimeters, formidable, emotionless engines of combat who understood the law of the fang, but not the delicate, almost human choice to withhold it. Choice. It was the ghost that haunted him. Had he chosen differently, perhaps the burden would be lighter. Had he not sworn that terrible oath to guard the very structure of the vampiric world, he might have found some small, quiet corner in the endless night to simply cease. But the oath, like the cold, was perpetual. A flicker in the periphery, a liquid grace of movement only visible to the preternatural eye, announced the arrival of Lucian, his personal steward and the oldest living vampire outside of the original 12. Lucian was a creature of impeccable silence and deep, almost paternal disapproval, a mirror reflecting Valerius's ancient, aristocratic facade. "My lord," Lucian's voice was a low, formal rasp, perfectly suited to the Gothic scale of the room. The new list from the city's orphanage arrived, and a preliminary report from the Northern Scouts. The Viridian plague is spreading faster than anticipated. Valerius did not look away from the fire. The Viridian plague, a curse of the old magic, was their impending doom, a creeping rot on the ancient bond between the vampire lines. "The orphanage list is unnecessary, Lucian. I told you, there is no candidate. They are all hollow echoes, empty vessels. The anchor is a position I hold alone. The search for a successor, a true, untainted vessel, is a folly. A final mercy would be to let this kingdom of ash fall with me." His voice, though low, carried the weight of marble against velvet, a dangerous contradiction of softness and strength. Lucian took a purposeful step closer, the old vampire's displeasure a tangible pressure in the air. "With respect, my lord, the oracle of the Silver Cloister predicted the arrival of the fated vessel at the turning of the solstice. The solstice is upon us. Your self-imposed exile in this frozen shell of a manor does not absolve you of the first oath. Your duty is to find them, to protect them, to transfer the anchor. Your choice is not between life and death, but between the salvation of our world and its eternal, agonizing ruin." Valerius finally turned, his gaze cutting the heat from the hearth, freezing the air between them. Do not speak to me of ruin, Lucian. I have been its sole architect and its most persistent victim. He strode toward the mahogany desk, his movement a whisper of silk on aged wood, picking up the dossier Lucian had placed there. It was a file marked Orphanage Candidates. He intended to burn it, but his eyes, impossibly, caught one name, starkly outlined against the brittle paper: Elias Thorne. The only note beneath it, written in a cramped, shaky script, simply read, "A quiet fire, unbreakable." Valerius felt a ripple in the stillness of his long-dead heart, a cold, sharp note of anticipation. He hated it. Anticipation was hope's twin, and hope was the cruelest of all lies. Chapter 2. The world outside the manor was a landscape of bitter reality, a stark contrast to Valerius's eternal, gilded prison. It was a realm of perpetual twilight, of biting wind that seemed to carry the whispered secrets of the impoverished city below. Elias Thorne, all 19 years and quiet resolve, knew this cold intimately. It was a cold that settled in the bone, a persistent companion in the small, underfunded cafe where he worked the late-night shift. The silent hearth was a dark, academia-styled anomaly tucked into the forgotten quarter of the city, surviving solely on the patronage of late-shift scholars and, occasionally, the unusually silent, sharply dressed elite. Elias moved with a practiced, focused rhythm, wiping down the marble countertop, his movements sparse and purposeful. He was a creature of routine and quiet fortitude, defined by the weight he carried, not the weight of his job, but the physical, constant burden of the child-sized, custom-made wheelchair he had to navigate in the cramped space. He glanced at the back booth, shrouded in velvet curtain, where Lycos, the owner's nephew, slept. Lycos was 5 years old, orphaned, and afflicted by a rare, brutal congenital disorder that left him frail and perpetually feverish. Elias was the only one capable of lifting the child, feeding him, and carrying the cumbersome, heavy wheelchair with the necessary gentleness and strength. He had been a caretaker since he was a boy, and the work was his penance, his quiet, fierce conviction. Lycos was his only anchor in a world that had abandoned them both. The cafe was quiet, the hour late enough to have chased away all but the most dedicated students. Elias poured a cup of black coffee for himself, a thick, bitter brew, and settled onto a stool, opening a worn copy of Ancient Philosophy. He read not for pleasure, but for answers, searching the words of long-dead thinkers for some justification for the brutal randomness of life and suffering. His emotional tone was one of deep melancholy, laced with an undeniable, quiet hope. The hope that he could keep Lycos safe, that his own strength would be enough. A small, high-pitched cough sounded from the back booth, sharp and distressing. Elias set the book down instantly, his movements quickening with alarm. Lycos's fevers always started like this. He slipped behind the curtain. The child was burning, his small face flushed and slick with sweat, his eyes wide with a dull, distant fear. He needed more medicine, something stronger than the over-the-counter remedies they could afford. He needed the rare, expensive serum only available through the city's private clinics that did not accept orphans or waiters. Elias lifted the child, his small, feverish body unnervingly light against the solid strength of Elias's arms, and then lifted the wheelchair, maneuvering both with a focused intensity that left no room for hesitation. He had to go to the pharmacy across town, now. As he emerged from the booth, Lycos held onto his collar, whimpering softly. Elias spoke to him in a low, soothing tone, a voice full of fierce protection. "It's all right, little wolf. We're going to get you what you need. Hold tight. We are unbreakable, remember?" He reached the front door and pushed it open, stepping out into the brutal, isolating wind. The sudden appearance of a massive, black carriage drawn by 2 unnaturally silent, coal-black horses immediately drew his attention. It was parked directly in front of the cafe, its Gothic, high-carved woodwork and obsidian windows screaming ancient wealth and danger. It was a blatant violation of the local parking ordinances, a display of power that made the hairs on Elias's arms rise. He tried to circumvent it, his concentration fixed on protecting the child in his arms, his mind already racing through the quickest route to the pharmacy. Then the carriage door opened. A man stepped out, Valerius de Calin. Valerius was a striking image in the twilight, a study in marble and shadow. His cloak was the color of midnight smoke, his movements a demonstration of unnatural, liquid grace. His beauty was terrible, inhuman, the kind of beauty that belonged on a mausoleum carving. The intensity of his storm-colored eyes, which fixed instantly upon the feverish child in Elias's arms, was a physical weight. Elias stopped, arrested by the sheer, overwhelming presence of the stranger. Valerius looked at Lycos and then back at Elias, his face a mask of cold, ancient contemplation. It was a close-up focus on a moment of physical contact, the boy's burning skin against Elias's shirt, that seemed to hold Valerius's full attention. Chapter 3. Valerius's initial observation was clinical, detached. He was there to assess the youth named Elias Thorn, the only candidate on Lucian's list flagged with the cryptic description, a quiet fire, unbreakable. He had expected a fanatic, a zealot, someone hungry for the power he offered. He had not expected the sight that greeted him, a youth of surprising, hard-won strength, defined by an act of deep, quiet mercy. Elias carried the child, Lycos, like a precious, fragile burden, his face etched with a desperate, protective tenderness that cut through Valerius's detachment like a splinter of ice. This was not the empty vessel he had anticipated. This was a human defined by immense conviction. The cold in Valerius's chest deepened. The child, the disabled one, radiated a fever that Valerius's vampiric senses registered instantly. The boy was dying, slowly and painfully, his small, frail body succumbing to a localized form of consumption. Valerius could stop the suffering with a single, brutal touch, or he could walk away. He had come to destroy the candidate dossier, to end the search, but the sight of Elias's fiercely protective stance over the small, sick boy arrested him. It triggered the oldest, deepest well of his guilt, the memory of the fragile human lives he had failed to protect, the ones that had been sacrificed on the altar of his ancient oath. "You are Thorn," Valerius stated, his voice formal and measured, an aristocratic intrusion into the grim reality of the street. It was sparse and purposeful, cutting through the wind. "Why do you carry such a burden? The child is clearly compromised, a liability. Life has already dictated his end." Elias tightened his grip on Lycos, shielding the boy instinctively. The stranger's language, formal, precise, and devoid of compassion, was a flag of warning. He is not a burden. He is Lycos, and his life is his own. I carry him because he is ill, and I am the one who can. Liability is a concept for ledgers, not for living things. Elias's response, though polite, was infused with a challenge that Valerius had not heard from a human in centuries. It was a statement of philosophical conflict, mercy versus nature. Valerius stepped closer, closing the distance between them. The contrast was stark, the marble stillness and unnatural grace of the vampire facing the determined, tired strength of the human. "You look tired, Thorn. You are pouring your strength, your very existence, into a life that cannot be saved by your own admission. Is this a penance, a declaration of faith, or simply foolish conviction?" Valerius wanted to elicit a reaction, a flicker of ambition or fear, something to discredit the youth and end the charade. Elias did not flinch, even when the vampire's inhumanly still face was only inches away. He smelled the air around the man, a scent of cold stone, ozone, and something powerfully, anciently wild. It is a choice, sir, Elias said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate tenor, fiercely protective. My choice. I choose to see him safe tonight. Now, if you would kindly move your carriage, I must get him medicine. The word choice, repeated the ghost that haunted Valerius. He had expected terror, had anticipated a plea for help. Instead, he encountered a wall of unbreakable, quiet resolve. This was a man who understood the burden of duty, who had found his own anchor in the desolate landscape of his life. Medicine, Valerius murmured, the word tasting of dust and cynicism. I can offer you something stronger than any mortal concoction. I can offer you release from the need to choose. His eyes fixed on Elias's face, searching for a sign of weakness. I don't seek release, sir. I seek only the survival of the child in my arms, Elias countered, the answer sparse and high value. He shifted Lycos, adjusting the blanket around the boy's head. Valerius studied the exchange. The human was an anomaly, not an empty vessel, but one already filled with conviction and self-sacrifice. He was not a vessel to be filled with the anchor's power, but a shield against Valerius's own self-destructive tendencies. The prophecy spoke of a vessel. Perhaps the prophecy was more complex, more ironic than he had allowed himself to believe. The boy, Lycos, coughed again, a sound that was suddenly, terribly urgent. Valerius made his decision. I know the serum you seek. It is rare, highly regulated, and currently unattainable for anyone without the highest connections. I can acquire it, and I can offer you a place where the air is clean, the cold is external, and the walls are a fortress against the coming plague. Valerius extended a gloved hand, his first offering of help in centuries. The price is simple. Come back with me, bring the child, live within my walls, be my anchor. Chapter 4. Elias looked at the extended hand, then at the child burning in his arms. The proposal was insane, the man terrifying, but the desperation in his heart, the pure animal drive to save Lycos, overrode all caution. The man spoke of a serum he desperately needed, a fortress he couldn't afford, and a position he didn't understand. Be my anchor. The language was formal, almost ceremonial. Yet, in the chilling depths of Valerius's amethyst eyes, Elias saw not malice, but a vast, consuming loneliness, an ancient wound that mirrored the desolation of his own heart. The choice was brutally simple. Trust the darkness for the sake of the light, or watch the light fade in the cold. Your price, sir. It is never simple, Elias stated, his voice tense but steady. What does it mean to be your anchor? I am not a fighter. I am not wealthy. I am merely a waiter. Valerius gave a short, cynical turn of his lips that was devoid of humor. You are more than merely a waiter, Thorn. You are a man who chooses burden over comfort. That is a rare commodity in a world obsessed with self. To be my anchor is to be the only human soul with the right to question my edicts, to be the mirror that reflects my humanity, the one I lost centuries ago, to be the reason I choose mercy over ruthlessness. It is a suicide mission, in essence. The vampiric political landscape is a viper's nest. They will perceive you as my weakness, my ultimate liability, but they will also fear you as my only choice. Elias hesitated for a long, aching moment, running his thumb over Lycos's sweaty brow. He saw the stakes clearly now, high, deadly, and driven by ancient politics he couldn't fathom. But the serum, the security, the protection from the Viridian plague Valerius had mentioned, these were concrete necessities. The philosophical argument was secondary to the immediate, desperate survival of the child. I accept, Elias said, the word a declaration of high-stakes vulnerability, but the serum must be administered tonight, and my duty to Lycos comes before all others, even yours. I require an oath from you, a solemn vow that the child will be protected medically and physically within your walls. Valerius stared at the human. He had not expected the demand for an oath, a demand that elevated the human from subordinate to equal. It was an act of immense conviction. A small, almost imperceptible warmth sparked in the vacuum of his chest. This was the quiet fire the oracle had spoken of. "I give you the oath of the firstborn," Valerius pronounced, his voice dropping in pitch, the very air around them seeming to solidify and grow heavier. It was ancient language's terminology, a covenant of the highest order. "I, Valerius de Calin, swear upon my lineage and the very core of my being that Lycos shall be guarded and healed within the walls of Calin Manor. His well-being is intrinsically linked to my own. Should harm befall him due to my negligence, I invite the ultimate, eternal dissolution of my soul." The oath was ironclad, unshakable. Elias nodded, finally trusting the terrible, formal earnestness in the vampire's expression. "Then let us go." He adjusted Lycos, preparing to maneuver the cumbersome wheelchair. Valerius dismissed the chair with a simple, decisive hand gesture. "Leave the artifact. My manor is not built for human convenience. I will carry the child." Elias instinctively recoiled. "No, I carry him. He only trusts me." Valerius met his gaze, his amethyst eyes holding the stillness of deep water. "He will die on the way to the manor without my intervention." "Thorn, I can stabilize him, regulate his temperature, and ensure his passage is smooth. Trust is a luxury you cannot afford tonight. You must learn to surrender a burden when a greater force offers a better outcome." It was a critical moment of internal conflict for Elias, trust versus control. Elias hesitated, his entire body tense, but the child's feverish whimper was the deciding factor. He gently transferred the small, burning weight of Lycos into Valerius's arms. The contrast was immediately visible. Lycos's small, sick body against the perfect marble-like strength of the vampire. Valerius held the child with a surprising yet fiercely protective gentleness. The moment the child was in his arms, the unnatural cold emanating from Valerius shifted, encompassing Lycos, stabilizing the raging fever with a cold, medicinal precision. Chapter 5. The journey to Calin Manor was a blur of silence and speed, the massive carriage gliding through the night as if on a carpet of shadow. Elias sat opposite Valerius, watching the impossible spectacle of the ancient vampire holding his charge. Valerius, usually a picture of aristocratic stillness, was focused entirely on the small, still form of Lycos, his thumb gently tracing the blue veins beneath the child's fever-pale skin. It was an intimate, high-stakes moment of vulnerability. The Viridian plague. Elias finally broke the silence, his voice low and tense. "What is it exactly? You mentioned it at the cafe." Valerius didn't look up, his gaze remaining fixed on Lycos. "It is a sickness of the blood, Thorn. It afflicts only those of the ancient bloodlines. It begins as a dull ache, a simple fever, and ends by dissolving the soul's anchor, turning the afflicted into mindless, feral predators. It is the beginning of the end. The ancient enemies are stirring, sensing the rot." His explanation was sparse, yet full of world-changing information. "The Covenant is weak, and I am its sole bastion. But even a bastion can crumble." Elias frowned, processing the stark reality of the supernatural world he had been thrown into. "And you believe I, a simple human, can somehow hold your world together?" Valerius finally lifted his gaze, the amethyst of his eyes capturing the faint, cold moonlight. "I believe you possess a quality that my kind eradicated centuries ago, the capacity for selfless choice. You choose the weaker, the compromised. You anchor yourself not to power, but to conviction. The anchor is not a container of strength, but a magnet for the will to survive. You, Elias Thorn, are a human defined by immense conviction. That, in this world of ancient guilt and self-serving monsters, is a power beyond measure." They arrived at the manor. It rose from the landscape like a terrifying visual metaphor. a fortress of black marble and looming spires, its windows watchful and dark. Inside the grand scriptorium was a vast cavern of shadowed mahogany and ancient leather. Valerius, with the quiet efficiency of a physician, laid Lycos on a velvet fainting couch near the hearth. He retrieved a small, sealed vial from a hidden recess in his desk, a liquid of shimmering, unnatural silver, the serum. "This is the Argentum elixir," Valerius explained. "It is not of this world, nor of this time. It will stabilize his fever, combat the localized infection, and grant him a shield. But it will also bind him to me, to the Manor's magic, in a way neither of us can fully comprehend." "Do it," Elias commanded instantly, stepping closer, his entire focus on the child. There was no hesitation, no philosophical debate, only a declaration of intent. Valerius administered the elixir. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The child's flush subsided, the ragged breathing calmed, and the small, frail body relaxed against the cushions. Lycos was sleeping soundly, safely. Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The relief was a profound, shaking weakness. Valerius watched the transformation in the human, the tense, protective facade dissolving into pure, exhausted relief. "You are relieved of your immediate burden, Anchor. The oath is held. You may now seek your own rest." Elias looked up at him, his eyes heavy with fatigue, but shining with gratitude. "Thank you for honoring your word. I owe you a debt." Valerius moved towards him, his proximity an electric tension in the still air. He reached out and gently touched the faint scar on Elias's cheek, a close-up focus on a physical contact. "You owe me nothing. The debt is ancient, and it belongs to me. You are simply the vessel through which I hope to pay it. Now tell me, Thorn, what is your conviction? What do you seek for yourself in this dangerous new life?" Chapter 6. Elias stepped back from the touch, his senses still reeling from the day's brutal shift in reality. The vampire's skin was cold and impossibly smooth, the touch a fleeting yet powerful jolt. Valerius's question was intimate, penetrating, and framed the central internal conflict of their interaction. "I seek nothing for myself," Elias answered, the dialogue line sparse and high value, revealing deep character backstory. "I seek only a world where the innocent can survive without being considered liabilities. I seek an end to the self-fulfilling prophecy of suffering. If being your anchor means I can hold one life steady, protect one corner of this crumbling, dark world, then that is enough. My conviction is simple. Survival is a right, not a privilege reserved for the strong or the cruel." Valerius listened, his unnatural stillness betraying nothing, yet his internal state was a storm of recognition. The sheer, uncompromising selflessness was both a wonder and a terrifying threat. It challenged every cynical principle he had upheld for millennia. This human wasn't looking for power, he was looking for justification to live a life of mercy. "You speak of survival, Thorn, yet you have placed yourself directly in the line of fire. My enemies will view you as the critical weakness, the chink in the Kaelin armor. They will seek to test my devotion to this fragile anchor, this symbol of my misplaced humanity." Valerius walked to a tall, arched window, gazing out at the perpetual twilight. The scene was one of stark contrast, light and shadow. "Tell me you are not afraid. Tell me that your conviction is truly unbreakable." Elias followed, standing close behind him. "I am afraid for Lycos, Lord Valerius, but I am not afraid for myself. I have nothing to lose that I have not already accepted as lost. My body is a tool for a specific purpose, to protect what cannot protect itself. If I must die to fulfill that purpose, then I die. But know this, if I fall, the only one who will weep for me is a small, feverish boy, and that, sir, is a profound and terrible kind of loneliness that even you, with your thousands of years, have likely never known. The use of the thematic word loneliness struck Valerius with the force of a physical blow. It was the repetition of his own internal trauma. He turned, fully facing Elias, the cold, ancient veneer cracking just slightly. "You misunderstand the nature of my longevity, Elias," Valerius said, the intimacy of the address deliberate. "Loneliness is my birthright. It is the silent, cold chamber in which I reside. I do not weep, but I remember. And I promise you, if any harm, physical or political, comes to you while you stand as my anchor, the retribution will be a cataclysm that will shatter the covenant and unleash the very ruin I was sworn to prevent. Your survival is now intrinsically tied to the survival of my world. You have become my final choice, the ultimate gamble." He reached out, not to touch, but to simply hover his hand near Elias's shoulder, a gesture that conveyed fierce protection. "Sleep now, Thorn. You are safe. The ancient manor, though cold, is bound by my oath. The burden of survival, for the moment, is mine to bear." Elias nodded, exhaustion finally winning over his adrenaline-fueled resolve. He glanced one last time at the sleeping Lycos, his quiet fire burning low but steady. He was in the den of a monster, but the monster had upheld his oath. He turned and followed a silent, cloaked attendant toward the guest chambers, the silence of the ancient manor settling around him like a heavy, velvet shroud. Valerius remained in the scriptorium, looking at the small, sleeping figure of the boy and the empty doorway where Elias had disappeared. The internal conflict was profound. He had sought a vessel for power and found a reason for mercy. He, the king of vampires, was now anchored to a mortal's conviction. His endless night had suddenly been pierced by a fragile, quiet fire. He picked up the heavy manuscript of the Lex Calin and dropped it into the hearth. The parchment, the symbol of his cold, oppressive rule, shriveled instantly, turning to ash. The choice had been made. His world would now be governed not by the law of the Fang, but by the fierce protection of a waiter and a sick child. The stakes had never been higher.